Guide Varlo vanished when the body was found. Aina Quell had burns on her hands. Callan Dre's parking permit was melted into the ashes. And Nerya Solis, the brilliant criminology student, was discovered charred beyond recognition in a remote field 9 days after she disappeared without a trace. What began as a missing person case would soon unravel into one of the most twisted and calculated murders the town of Armagh had ever seen. Nerya Solis had always been the kind of student professors remembered for all the right reasons. She wasn't the loudest in the classroom or the most outspoken in campus events, but her dedication to her criminology studies made her quietly stand out. A second-year student at Valemont State University, Nerya spent her days between classes, the library where she worked part-time, and long solo walks around the university's surrounding trails. To anyone who knew her, she seemed grounded, ambitious, and disciplined, traits that gave no hint of what would happen next. On a Friday evening in early March, Nerya left her shift at the university library just after 6 p.m. She waved goodbye to the security guard and stepped out into the cool dusk. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her roommate Rayla grew concerned the next morning when Nerya's bed was untouched and her phone had been switched off. Nerya had never pulled an all-nighter outside her dorm without informing someone. At first, campus authorities treated the case as a possible runaway, but her parents quickly dismissed the idea. Nerya was weeks away from presenting a major research paper and had never shown any signs of emotional distress or instability. Things escalated quickly when her bag was found abandoned 2 days later at the edge of Hillpine Forest, a dense stretch of woods that students rarely visited, especially at night. Inside the bag were her books, student ID, a half-eaten granola bar, and a neatly folded hoodie. Her phone was missing, but curiously, her wallet was untouched. The discovery sparked a full-scale search effort. Dozens of officers, cadaver dogs, and volunteers combed through the forest for days, but found nothing else. The only notable clue was a single muddy footprint beside the bag, larger than a woman's shoe size and pressed deep into the earth as if someone had been standing still, watching. Media coverage spread across the state. Photos of Nerya circulated on social media, her smiling face becoming the symbol of another young woman gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Her classmates organized candlelight vigils while the police worked silently behind the scenes, looking for digital traces. They requested her phone records and pulled up CCTV footage from every surrounding building and road leading from the library to her dorm. One frame stood out, a grainy image showing Nerya crossing a quiet intersection. She was alone, wearing headphones and headed in the opposite direction of her usual route home. That detail didn't make sense. Her dorm was south of the library, but she had been walking north toward the woods. Investigators considered that she might have agreed to meet someone there, maybe to interview for her criminology project. It was widely known she had been researching behavioral patterns of suspected predators, and anonymous tipsters had claimed she was looking into potential misconduct on campus. But without her phone or messages, the trail felt cold. More subtle clues began to emerge. A campus janitor reported seeing Nerya arguing with a man in a gray hoodie a week before she vanished. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Another student recalled overhearing Nerya mention something about digging too deep. That comment, vague as it was, triggered even more speculation. Was she onto something? Did she uncover a secret she wasn't supposed to know? Despite intense media pressure and a community desperate for answers, no breakthrough came. Her family offered a reward for any information. Investigators released sketches and anonymous tip lines. But the silence was deafening. Then, on the 9th day, something shifted. A local jogger exploring a trail on the far end of the forest noticed something glinting under a pile of leaves. It was a bracelet, silver with 3 blue stones. Nerya's mother confirmed it had belonged to her daughter, a birthday gift from years ago that she always wore. The bracelet's location was far from the spot where her bag had been found, and it wasn't on a public trail. Whoever had been there knew the woods well and wanted Nerya to disappear without a trace. The discovery of the bracelet reignited the investigation with a renewed urgency. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was confirmation that Nerya had indeed entered the deeper part of the forest, and someone had gone to great lengths to hide her presence there. The bracelet's location was mapped, and a new search grid was established. Search teams combed through nearby areas with specialized equipment, hoping for a body, a phone, or even clothing, but nothing more was found. What the bracelet did offer, however, was a subtle but powerful clue. Someone had carried or lured Nerya to that spot, and they knew enough to leave almost no trace behind. With pressure mounting, investigators dug deeper into Nerya's recent activities. Her professors reported that she had been unusually intense in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She was deeply involved in her research project, which focused on deviant psychology and digital communities where anonymity encouraged dangerous behavior. Her laptop revealed hundreds of pages of notes, screen captures, and journal entries. She had compiled a list of usernames from obscure message boards, many of which discussed the fantasy of committing the perfect crime. Among the names, one stood out: Vanished Truth. This username had been flagged on multiple forums for graphic and disturbing content. Nerya had highlighted it in her notes and written a simple line beneath it: "He's real." Investigators traced the IP address to a location near Belmont, but it had been routed through multiple proxies. It wasn't much, but it was enough to dig further. That's when they found the name Gide Varlo. A 24-year-old former student at Belmont, Gide had dropped out 2 years earlier after being accused of assaulting another student at a party. The charges never stuck due to lack of evidence, and he vanished from campus life soon after. But digital forensics placed one of his old email accounts behind the Vanished Truth handle. Detectives visited his last known address, a rundown home on the outskirts of town. He wasn't there. His neighbors hadn't seen him in weeks. Eventually, Gide was tracked down to a temporary job site where he worked under a different name. He was brought in for questioning. At first, he claimed he didn't know Nerya, but when presented with a printed screenshot from her laptop showing a thread he had participated in, his story shifted. He admitted to meeting her once, more than a year ago, when he tutored freshmen in sociology. He said she had reached out again recently, asking vague questions about online forums and criminal behavior. According to him, they only exchanged a few messages, nothing more. Gide's behavior raised red flags. He had fresh scratches on his arms, which he attributed to clearing brush during a hike. His car had been recently detailed, unusual for someone who otherwise lived carelessly. Investigators couldn't find any DNA evidence linking him to Nerya, but something felt off. Even without direct proof, his pattern of behavior aligned too well with the online persona Nerya had been chasing. As suspicion grew, Gide's digital footprint began to unravel further. His deleted browser history included articles about body decomposition and police search techniques. A receipt was recovered showing he had purchased a gas can and gloves from a hardware store 4 days after Nerya's disappearance. When confronted with this, he claimed the items were for yard work, though no such activity was visible at his residence. While police worked to build a stronger case around Gide, they turned back to Nerya's social circle. One person in particular began to draw attention: Callan Dre, a soft-spoken environmental science major who had shared multiple classes with Nerya. On the surface, there was nothing alarming about Callan, but phone metadata showed that his number had pinged near Hillpine Forest the same night Nerya went missing, despite him claiming to be home asleep. When questioned, he grew nervous, then evasive. As the pieces slowly came together, a disturbing possibility emerged. Nerya may have unknowingly uncovered a network far more dangerous than she anticipated, one that operated in shadows, used coded language, and punished those who asked too many questions. 9 days after Nerya Solis vanished, the case took a horrifying turn. In a rural area nearly 10 miles outside of Armagh, a fire was reported in an abandoned field behind a neglected farmhouse. The blaze had been intense but localized, burning out before it could spread to the nearby trees. A neighbor spotted smoke and alerted the fire department. By the time the crew arrived, only smoldering earth and ash remained. At first glance, it appeared to be a trash fire, one of many illegal burns often seen in that part of the county. But when a firefighter sifted through the debris, they found something unthinkable: a scorched bone, clearly human. Investigators were called to the scene immediately. Forensics teams began the painstaking process of recovering what little was left. Scattered among the ash were fragments of burned clothing, melted plastic, and most disturbingly, a jawbone with intact dental structure. Within 48 hours, dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Nerya Solis. The confirmation sent shockwaves through the community. What had been a missing person case was now officially a murder investigation. The condition of the remains suggested an intentional attempt to destroy evidence. Gasoline had been used as an accelerant, and there were signs that the fire had been started at night, likely to avoid detection. The property where the fire occurred had been unoccupied for years, its last owner deceased, and the land entangled in legal disputes. It was the perfect location, isolated, quiet, and forgotten. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure Nerya's body would never be found. Among the ashes, forensic technicians recovered a partially melted piece of plastic. At first it looked like garbage, but under closer inspection, it was revealed to be part of a parking permit issued by Valemont State University. Investigators were able to reconstruct enough of the barcode and serial number to trace it back to a specific student, Callan Dre. The discovery was damning. Colin had already been on the radar due to phone data placing him near Hillpine Forest on the night Nerya disappeared. Now, with a piece of his parking permit found at a makeshift burn site containing Nerya's body, suspicion hardened into near certainty. He was brought in for questioning again, but this time his demeanor changed. He was visibly shaken, unsure of what investigators already knew. Despite claiming he had no connection to the area where the body was found, records showed Callan's car had been ticketed in that same rural zone 2 years earlier, suggesting he knew the area well. He also had no credible explanation for how his parking permit ended up at a burn site. His roommate said he had been quiet in the days after Nerya vanished, and one even remembered Callan taking his car to a wash late at night, which was out of character for him. Still, without direct evidence tying him to the murder, Callan was released under surveillance. Investigators suspected he hadn't acted alone. The case was growing in complexity, suggesting premeditation and planning far beyond a single person acting on impulse. Forensic experts continued to study the site, and one of them discovered a hair strand caught under a charred log miraculously unburned. DNA testing later confirmed it didn't belong to Nerya or Callan, it belonged to someone else. This led to another digital cross-reference, matching the DNA with records from a previous case involving none other than Gide Varlo. It was no longer speculation. Gide and Callan were connected, perhaps not friends in the traditional sense, but bonded by something far darker. Whether they had planned Nerya's murder together or became entangled through shared secrets was still unknown. What was clear was that Nerya had uncovered something monstrous, and those involved had gone to terrifying lengths to silence her. In the ashes of that forgotten field, the truth had started to reveal itself, one burned fragment at a time. As the investigation pushed forward, the emerging pattern became undeniable. Nerya Solis had not just stumbled into danger, she had become the target of a calculated collaborative effort to keep dark secrets buried. With Gide Varlo now directly linked to the burn site through DNA, and Callan Dre unable to explain the presence of his university parking permit in the ashes, detectives knew there had to be more layers. This wasn't the work of a lone killer, it had the markings of a small but coordinated network. In a last effort to reconstruct Nerya's final days, investigators began to revisit her digital activity in more detail. Among her saved browser tabs and hidden folders was a Word document filled with notes and screenshots. One folder, titled Echo Profiles, contained images of anonymous posts on underground message boards where users discussed real-life crimes with disturbing fascination. Each post was tagged with usernames, alias like Wired Soul, Pine Marrow, and Null Halo. But one name showed up more than others, Crime Seed. It was tied to a user who posted cryptic messages about surveillance, manipulation, and the psychology of hiding in plain sight. Forensics traced this alias to a university email that had once belonged to a current psychology student, Nerya Solis. Nerya was a 22-year-old top-performing student, known for her intense interest in behavioral manipulation. She had interned under the university's behavioral sciences lab and published a research paper on group psychosis. She was intelligent, precise, and disturbingly cold under pressure. When approached by police for questioning, Nerya didn't show surprise. She calmly explained that she knew Nerya through classes and mutual projects but hadn't interacted with her in months. She denied any involvement in Nerya's disappearance or death. Her story might have held up until investigators obtained a warrant for her computer and found a hidden partition filled with encrypted chat logs. Once decrypted, the chats revealed a private online circle, an exclusive message thread between 4 individuals using aliases.
including Aina, Callan, Guide, and an unknown fourth member who used the name Lyric Fall. The discussions dated back over a year and included simulations of abductions, debates about perfect murder strategies, and role-playing exercises where they mapped out criminal scenarios in real environments. What alarmed investigators most was the way these chats blurred the line between fantasy and reality. In one exchange, Crime Seed wrote, "If someone pokes too deep, we don't scare them off, we erase the trail." Days before Nerya vanished, Lyric Fall posted, "Red Thread is watching. We close the circle soon." Nerya had been using a red thread graphic as her visual branding for her criminology blog, a coincidence that was no longer a coincidence. Faced with this evidence, Ina's composure cracked for the first time. She didn't confess outright, but her silence became louder than words. She was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. During processing, investigators noticed injuries on her hands, small burns and abrasions, consistent with handling accelerants or moving hot debris. Meanwhile, digital forensics uncovered more. Nerya had attempted to reach out to someone days before her disappearance, someone she may have hoped could expose the truth. That person was never identified, but police suspected she was trying to leak information outside the university before she was silenced. As the digital web unraveled, it became clear Nerya had wandered into a psychological experiment taken too far. What started as a twisted academic interest among peers had turned into a dangerous subculture, a secret club that slowly began to test its theories in real life. The lines between simulation and reality disappeared completely when Nerya decided to pull the mask off. For those she exposed, silence became survival, and when silence failed, fire followed. With Aina in custody, and digital evidence mounting against her and her co-conspirators, the final layers of the case began to fall into place. Investigators intensified their efforts to locate Gij Varlo, who had gone missing shortly after Aina's arrest. The FBI was brought in, tracking his known aliases and credit card activity across several states. He had altered his appearance, traveled by bus, and used burner phones, but a surveillance camera at a bus station in Elmont near the Canadian border finally caught his face. Within hours, agents surrounded the station. Gij was found in a corner booth, eating alone. He did not resist arrest. During interrogation, Gij said nothing for nearly 2 days, but faced with the overwhelming digital trail message logs, forensic evidence from the burn site, and Aina's partial confession, he cracked. The story he told was chilling. According to Gid, the group never intended for things to go as far as they did. What started as an intellectual experiment had spiraled out of control. He claimed they began by studying how people react to the idea of crime, planning scenarios, sharing locations, even testing boundaries by trailing random strangers. It was a game, he said, until Nerya began asking questions. She had found their forum, lurked in their discussions, and eventually created a fake account to probe deeper. Gid admitted that she was smart, too smart. She asked pointed questions, connected dots too quickly. They had figured out who she was before she realized how much danger she was in. Anna and Callan wanted to scare her, maybe ruin her research, or discredit her academically. But when Nerya agreed to meet Callan in person, believing it was an anonymous source for her project, everything went wrong. At the arranged meeting spot near Hillpine Forest, Nerya immediately realized she'd been tricked. There was no source, just Callan and Gid. She tried to leave, but an argument broke out. Gid said it was Callan who pushed her first, and when she fell, she hit her head on a rock. Panic overtook them. They froze, unsure of what to do. Anna was called, and the three met later that night, agreeing that calling the police would end all their lives, academic careers gone, reputations destroyed, jail time inevitable. It was Anna who suggested the fire. She had researched decomposition rates and knew how to cover forensic traces. Callan offered access to the abandoned farmland through a family friend who once owned the property. They moved Nerya's body in the trunk of Gid's car, doused it with gasoline, and set it ablaze, believing the remoteness of the location would keep them safe. But guilt had started to unravel them almost immediately. Callan grew distant and paranoid, scrubbing his car and avoiding social interaction. Rena had tried to maintain control, deleting messages, encrypting files, and framing their actions as something necessary, even scientific. Dorit, however, broke under pressure, avoiding everyone and ultimately planning to flee. As part of a plea deal, Dorit offered more, a hidden flash drive containing backups of their full chat logs, forum activity, and even audio recordings of their planning sessions. It was enough to charge all three with premeditated murder, conspiracy, and destruction of evidence. Verena was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Callan received 30 years after a guilty plea. Greed, with his cooperation, received 20 years under close supervision. Nerya's death became a symbol, not just of a brilliant student lost too soon, but of the dangers of digital anonymity and academic obsession turned into cruelty. Belmont State University held a memorial, establishing a scholarship in her name for students pursuing forensic science and criminal justice. Her research, unfinished but powerful, was published posthumously as a cautionary tale. In the end, it wasn't just curiosity that cost Nerya her life. It was the silence, the secrecy, and the horrifying reality that the monsters she studied didn't just exist in textbooks or online. They were seated beside her in lecture halls, hidden behind normal smiles, pretending to be students just like her.